Today we're not just going to be looking at numbers on a screen. We're actually opening a detective case file, the case of the global copper market. It's a story that's full of hidden clues, mysterious players, and a central puzzle that could honestly reshape entire economies. So let's jump right in with the first piece of evidence. Okay, so here it is. This is the mystery right at the heart of our investigation. Just take a look at these two charts. That top line shows the total value of copper being traded around the world. And after peaking back in 2021, you can see it staying stubbornly high. But look at the bottom line. That's the actual physical amount of copper moving around, and it has absolutely fallen off a cliff since 2022. So that's the core question, right? It defies basic economics. How does that happen? It really suggests that there's something much deeper, something structural going on just beneath the surface. And in this explainer, we're going to find out exactly what that is. Now, to solve a mystery this complex, we can't just rely on the headlines. No way. We need a high-tech forensic toolkit. And for our investigation, we're using a really powerful data-driven model that crunches millions of global trade records to find patterns that are pretty much invisible to the naked eye. So this slide really shows the fundamental tug-of-war that's happening in the copper market. Over on the left, you've got this vicious cycle of vulnerability. What happens is supply shortages create bottlenecks, and that causes prices to spike, which just makes the whole problem even worse. But on the right, you have a virtuous cycle of resilience, where using more scrap copper actually brings stability. And these two forces, they're in a constant battle for control. All right, so with our tools in hand, the investigation begins. And what the data reveals is, well, it's a series of pretty shocking clues. We're talking about a hidden network of choke points, shadow markets, and really fragile players that completely changes how we should be looking at this essential metal. Okay, so our first major clue is called stage-specific starvation. Now, what this means is that the world isn't actually running out of copper ore. The real problem is a massive bottleneck, a traffic jam, right in the middle of the supply chain. The smelters and refiners, they just can't process it fast enough. And that ends up starving the manufacturers downstream who desperately need the finished product. And this chart right here, this is basically the smoking gun. Look at that orange line at the top. That's the upstream ore coming in, and it's holding relatively steady. But now look at the gold and teal lines at the bottom. That's the downstream and scrap volume. They are in an absolute freefall. This is the hard data that proves the bottleneck isn't just real, it's getting worse. So this bottleneck, it creates what you could call a fragility map of the world. This chart plots nations based on two things: how few suppliers they have and how little influence they have in the market. Well, the countries in that bottom right corner, colored in red, places like Namibia and Antigua and Barbuda, they are in a really perilous position. They depend on very, very few suppliers and have almost no power to go out and find new ones. And the research puts it pretty starkly. It says these fragile nations are basically trapped. They have to rely on a single dominant geopolitical partner just to survive. So you can imagine if that relationship is ever severed by something like tariffs or a blockade, their access to this critical material could be cut off overnight with just no alternative. But believe it or not, the story gets even stranger. The model started flagging thousands of trades with really unusual pricing. So the blue dots you see here, those are normal transactions. The red dots, though, they are so far outside the norm that they point to a shadow market. This could be used for things like secretly moving money out of a country, what's known as capital flight, all hidden in plain sight within the official trade data. And the data even pinpoints where all this shadow activity is concentrated. As you can see in this second chart, certain hubs import huge volumes of copper only to immediately export it again. They're acting like washing centers, rerouting global flows to hide their true origin and destination. They're effectively laundering the copper's trail, which adds a whole other layer of complexity to our mystery. Okay, so we've seen the problems. We've got bottlenecks, we've got fragility, and we've got these shadow markets. But the data also points to a powerful countermove, a kind of secret weapon in this whole story. And that weapon is scrap copper and the circular economy. And the comparison is incredibly clear. When you rely on newly mined raw ore, you're exposing yourself to volatile prices, a huge carbon footprint, and immense geopolitical risk. Scrap metal, on the other hand, is basically the opposite. It provides price stability, it's way better for the environment, and it helps insulate a country's supply chain from all those global shocks. And this isn't just a defensive move. This is actually a massive financial opportunity. The analysis found that, on average, scrap copper trades at a 38.2% discount compared to newly refined copper. I mean, that is a huge price gap that smart companies and countries can take advantage of. And look, this isn't just some theoretical idea. It is already happening. This chart shows the global ratio of scrap imports versus ore imports. You can see it has surged from 25% to over 32% in just 1 year. This is hard evidence of a major structural shift towards circularity that's happening right now. So, all of this intelligence, all these clues, they lead to a new rulebook for navigating this market. It's a data-driven survival strategy for what's becoming an increasingly volatile world. It's about moving from just watching the market to actively managing its risks. So the strategy is called Circular Risk Parity, or CRP. Just think of it like a modern investment portfolio, but for physical materials. Instead of just buying whatever's cheapest that day, it mathematically balances your risk. It does that by allocating more towards stable, reliable sources, like scrap copper, to protect you from shocks in that more volatile raw ore market. And this right here. This is the final answer. Based on years of historical volatility data, the model calculated the perfect mix. To get maximum stability and continuity, an optimal portfolio would be nearly 50% scrap, about 34% refined copper, and only about 17% in volatile raw ore. This is basically the new formula for resilience. So, we've cracked the case of the great copper decoupling. We found the hidden bottlenecks, we found the fragile networks, and we found a powerful solution in the circular economy. But it leaves us with one final, and I think crucial question. If this is the secret story of copper, what other critical materials out there, like lithium, cobalt, or nickel, are telling a similar tale, just waiting for a detective to read the clues?